on workshops that I've run, I've always had people say, well, I'm not quite there yet. And I always want to say, well, where is there? I don't think we ever reach there. I think there's always room to grow. There's always room for improvement in so many areas.
Welcome to the She Clicks Women in Photography podcast. I'm Angela Nicholson, and I'm the founder of She Clicks, which is a community for female photographers. In these podcasts, I talk to women in the photographic industry to hear about their experiences, what drives them, and how they got to where they are now. This episode is with Donna Crous, an award-winning food photographer based in Jersey in the Channel Islands. From her home studio, she works closely with brands and PR agencies developing recipes and creating imagery for food campaigns, social media, websites and print publications. Donna has worked on multiple cookery books, and her work is regularly featured in photographic and cookery magazines around the world. In 2021, Donna released her own cookery book, A Healthier Family for Life. Hi Donna, thank you so much for joining me today on the She Clicks Women in Photography podcast.
Hi, Ange. Thank you for having me and inviting me to speak. So exciting.
Well, it seems like we've known each other for absolutely ages, but I was thinking about it the other day. We've only actually met in person on one occasion, and that was at the photography show in Birmingham, in the UK. Last year in September, you flew in to do a couple of talks, and also because you'd made the final selection for the She Clicks exhibition, which was very exciting. So it was really, really nice to see you. You got to hang out with a few She Clickers. We went out for dinner and had a really nice time.
I know, it was a lot of fun.
I was thinking it's testament to social media and all the messaging apps and, and Zoom we've used quite a few times that has enabled us to connect and form a friendship, despite the fact that, there's like I say, what is it? It's the English Channel between us, because you're in Jersey, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly, the English Channel. And it's quite far, actually. Not something I'd want to swim.
But if I remember correctly, you started out working in banking.
Yes.
So how did you move towards becoming a professional photographer?
So I originally started in banking, and I left banking to have my daughters because it was so demanding. The work was so demanding. I felt that we felt that I couldn't serve two masters. So left banking and kind of just became a full-time mum. But I think at the same time, while I was being a full-time mum, I was dabbling in a couple of things. Like I started a little gift hamper business, and then I learned how to bake cakes for the local home-based store. And then, so I did a number of little odd things, like small little businesses that I started. And then when my girls were old enough, I decided that I wanted to go back to work, but I'd lost a huge amount of my skills. So we're talking 20 years now. So I'd lost my skills and my confidence. So then I just had no idea what I was going to get back into. And I think taking those few skills, those smaller skills, which at the time I didn't think were very useful, I started to sort of focus on what I had already done and what I'd already played around with, which was the cooking and the baking. And I decided to start a blog. And loved blogging, loved writing the recipes and creating the recipes. And then I realized that I needed to improve the photography. It's one of those things. Blogging is a great way to find out to learn a huge amount of skills all at the same time. And so I decided I needed to upskill on my photography side. And I think from there just realized that I just had this absolute love for the photography side. That's where the passion for the actual photography came from. And I remember a friend of mine's husband, he's a psychologist, so he always seems to ask the perfect question. And he said to me, he was quizzing me about blogging, and he said, what is your favorite part about the whole blogging process? What part gets you the most excited? And it was then when I answered that, when I realized that it was the photography. And he said, well, then that's what you need to focus on. If that's what you love and that's what gets you excited, then that's the part that you need to grow. And so kind of just develop from there.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Sometimes you do need someone to ask you those questions. You know the answers. They're quite easy to answer, but you don't ask them yourself. You sort of jog along on a particular path.
Yeah.
You need someone to just ask you those pertinent questions every now and again.
Well, that's exactly it. It was the first time that I'd actually really kind of broken down the whole process. Just based on the questions he was asking, what do I do at each stage? And then the overall question was, so out of all of these stages, which is your favorite? And I think breaking it down and then having to answer that question really hit home that that's what gets me excited. That's why I do the rest of it. And yeah, I think it's a really good way to do things, to check things out, is to just break it up and try and see which part of it you actually enjoy the most.
And at that stage, what were you shooting on? Were you using a camera or were you using your phone?
Early stages, that was probably still my phone. Yeah. And then I went on a food photography course because there wasn't really much information out there. There was very little available as to how to shoot food. And I knew the particular style that I wanted to shoot, and I just didn't have a clue how I could go about doing it. And I started with going on a 2-hour food photography course in London, very casual, very relaxed course. And everybody had phones except for one lady. And I was positioned next to her. And every time she took a photo on her DSLR, I kept on looking over and looking at the back screen, and I see this beautiful image. And I, really frustrated I couldn't get that on my phone, which then made me venture into kind of trying to get a better understanding of lighting and obviously my equipment that I was using, and kind of braving the big world of big cameras.
Are you still in touch with that woman?
No, I didn't actually make friends with her. She was just positioned next to me, and I would just kind of look over her shoulder and see what was going on her side. I was way more interested in what she was doing than what I was doing.
But I think it would be really nice if she probably doesn't realise how big an impact she had on you. The fact that she was there, the only one with a camera, inspired you to move on and pick up a camera.
Exactly. And even the course that I was doing, it was just a small little course done by someone who just decided to share her knowledge on food photography. It was very basic, very simple. But I think the biggest learning curve for me in terms of my photography and looking around and photographing things. I mean, honestly, it was a quick, short little course, but it changed my world.
And you mentioned that you had a hamper business and you had started making cakes for a shop. So you were obviously quite food focused from the outset.
Always been food focused. I'm a total foodie.
And you like cooking?
Yeah, I do. And I was very focused on health. We were dealing with some health issues with the family, and I realized that we needed to address our diets. And so I kind of went down this world of this kind of path of being a health coach and studying healthy food and healthy cooking and nutrition and that sort of thing, which is why I started my blog, which was a health blog. But what I got really frustrated with was that all the pictures for health blogs are so, I don't know, they're so cliched. It's sort of bright colored food on a light colored background. And that's never been the kind of style that ever kind of spoke to me in terms of photography. So I would then try and take all this healthy looking food and put it into, totally separate, the style that I shoot in, sort of old worldy, old cottagey kind of look, which probably don't really go. But they were my photos, so I could really just do what I wanted to. And it's just sort of started playing around in that area. And for me, so I think that's where I sort of crossed over from going from just purely health focused to getting into the photography and really playing around on the photography side as well, because it was trying to get this perfect crossover of really beautifully styled images and a healthy recipe at the same time. So it was quite a challenge in the beginning.
When you started out, you know what you didn't want to produce. You didn't want those sort of bright images. You wanted a cozier, darker feel. But did you have any role models, or was there anybody or any work that you were looking at thinking this is the sort of thing I would like to produce?
Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of photographers at the time that I knew I wanted my work to look like. Eva Cosmos Flores was one of those, and I think there was another photographer, Trisha Hayes. I don't think she even photographs anymore, but she had a little course that she sold, an online course that I bought from her, and just trying to work out how to get that dark photography to actually work. So not shooting, you automatically think, oh, dim the lights and block out all the lights, but it was trying to work out how to get the hero or the subject illuminated in a darker setting. So that's really the work that had to go into it, was trying to establish all of those sort of little nuances that go with that sort of dark, moody style photography.
Yes, it requires very subtle lighting, doesn't it? Because you don't want to end up with just a mass of highlights and then deep, deep shadows. You've got to think quite carefully about that.
Exactly. And you've got to have light on the actual subject without any other surround light. So it's about trying to make sure that your subject is still standing out in the middle of quite a dark setting. So you can't darken the whole thing, otherwise you lose your subject. So those were the things I was really trying to play around with and trying to establish how I could still sort of, if I took a picture of a cake, how the cake would really kind of pop out, but then the rest of it was sort of dark and moody and yet that sort of that old masters kind of look, sort of the old master style painting look to it instead.
Yes, you definitely achieved that. And I think it kind of looks cozy as well, in a kind of a warming way. Most people's kitchens are brighter than that, but it feels like a homely, warming, cozy kind of image to look at, I'd say, a lot of your work.
I think that's one of the reasons why I was so set on going with that particular style, because I wanted my food I didn't want it to fall into a niche look of, I've just stepped out of the gym and just pureed or blitzed up a green juice. I wanted it to be something that anybody felt relatable to, that they could look at it and then maybe go, oh my word, actually that dish is actually a healthy dish, or it's gluten-free or it's dairy-free or whatever. And I think that was one of my biggest challenges. In fact, actually with my book, that was one of my biggest challenges, because my publishers were determined that I had to have a certain look. And I was prepared to walk away from the deal because I knew that I still wanted to stick to my style of photography all the way through, right even to writing a book. It's just something that's always kind of resonated with me, that I want people to look at the images and feel cozy and comfortable and not feel like they have to be in gym wear to be able to make that recipe, for instance.
And we'll come back to your book in a little while, but how did you go from then, you put all your effort into your photography to make it better for your blog, but how did you then develop that into a business?
Pretty much at the same time, I entered the Pink Lady Food Photographer of the Year Awards, but I was too scared to enter as a photographer, so I entered into the blogging section, which has now changed. I think the title of that category is now online influencer or something. So I still kind of stuck to the blogging section, and I submitted a couple of pictures. And next thing I knew, 2 had been shortlisted. I really had no idea the size of the competition and the reach of the competition, and was then invited to the finals. One of my images made it into the finals, and I think it was walking through the doors and being served champagne out of the biggest champagne bottle I've ever seen in my life. Suddenly struck me at just the size and the magnitude of the actual competition. And then from there, a lot of doors just started opening for me, and particularly on the photography side, speaking at the photography show, and then later joining up with Nikon and running food photography workshops through Nikon and speaking on their stage at the photography show, and then later becoming an ambassador. But then at the same time, I'd been working with a blogger friend of mine, and she'd asked for some help on a recipe, and then said to me, "Oh, are you a food photographer as well? If that's the case, would you mind shooting my book?" So, and she was based in New York. So it all kind of just happened round about the same time, where I ended up shooting the book and then being represented in the food photography competition. So yeah, all just kind of one of those perfect storms.
I think it's very easy to look at it that way. Oh, and then this just happened, and then that just happened. But the fact is, you'd made a whole series of steps to get to a point where those things could happen. So you would meet people, you entered the competition, you went to the exhibition, your picture was on the wall, lots of people saw it, your name would have been read out, all that sort of stuff. It is a fabulous exhibition they put on, and it's always nice to see all the work, because they look so great on the wall.
Mm.
And it's it's a big thing.
Yeah, there's something so surreal about walking into that gallery and seeing your picture hanging up on the wall. I mean, it's just, with someone who had never had an exhibition or never I hadn't entered many competitions. I'd entered competitions at my camera club. I had joined a camera club by that stage, and I'd entered competitions at the camera club. But to actually see your image framed and titled and with other images that are similar, and so absolutely surreal. But it sounds a little bit cliched to say I planted a lot of seeds in terms of it took me a while, and it took me making a lot of mistakes to get to where I was. It didn't kind of just happen. I photographed every single day. I woke up, I wasn't earning an income out of it initially, and I made sure that I treated it as a job. So every day I made sure that I photographed something so that I would try and learn as much as I possibly could in these self shoots that I was doing. When I say self shoots, I mean, I wasn't working for a client. So I was just kind of going to my fridge going, oh, I've got a bag of tomatoes. Let me see what I can do with that. And that took time. The particular style I wanted to shoot in was really hard to try and work hard and really try and come to grips with what I wanted, what I had in my head, and being able to transfer that into an image. And very frustrating. A lot of really, really bad images were shot long before I actually even started to put my pictures out there. So, I mean, I know it sounds like it all just kind of happened at the same time, but there was a lot of build up to that. And there were a lot of seeds that I'd planted along the way that some took and some didn't, and some grew and some didn't. And a very frustrating time, but at the same time, very exciting. Difficult to kind of merge the two together, but that really was how it began.
I think a lot of photographers who are going from that transition, or thinking about becoming professional, moving towards being professional, they look at their images and they look at their hit rate and think, oh, I'm not good enough. But no professional photographer tells everybody how many mistakes they made or tells people about the terrible images they captured in the process of capturing that one award-winning shot. And I think that's the difference, isn't it? You've got to hold on to, this is my success. So when you were at the Pink Lady Food Photography Awards, nobody put all the other, 10 dozen images that weren't quite right on the wall. They have the one that really works. And that's what really swings it. That's what people get excited about.
Yeah, I mean, I initially started shooting for my Instagram. And the Instagram images are so highly curated, and they're so selected, and there's so much thought that goes into it. Which picture goes after which picture, so that your wall looks satisfying, and somebody lands on your account and they instantly want to follow you because your wall is so appealing to them. So it is incredibly highly curated, and I think people need to understand that it doesn't just happen. That there are. And even now, I'll look at a lot of my pictures that might have won awards and have had really great accolades, and I haven't quite felt that with that picture, So some of the pictures I look at and I always cringe because I think, well, it's not perfect. I look at it and it's just not perfect, yet it's done very well in other areas. So we can sometimes, I know I'm very, very tough on myself and very tough on my images, and then I always look at them and think, well, they're never quite perfect. There's a lot more that I could have done to it at a later stage if I'd had the chance. So I think sometimes I can be a little bit too harsh on myself, and I certainly see that in other photographers. On workshops that I've run, I've always had people say, well, I'm not quite there yet, and I always want to say, well, where is there? I don't think we ever reach there. I think there's always room to grow. There's always room for improvement in so many areas. And, if we always just hold off until we're there, we never know when we're going to be there.
Yeah. And, there are trends, taste change as well. So, you might be fantastic at one area of photography, but then tastes evolve and you need to move in that direction and find out how to do that, improve that, and become somebody who leads those trends. Yeah,
you've definitely got to stay ahead of the trends, and you've got to be able to pivot and change. And when I initially started, I think a lot of my images were really dark, and I've slowly started to come out of that into a sort of a more even toned kind of style. So for instance, a picture on my book, on the cover of my book, every time I look at it, I cringe because it was one of my very first pictures, one of my first recipes, and we didn't reshoot it, and the publishers took that picture. So I submitted that picture for the recipe, and that suddenly ended up being the cover of the book, and I'd taken that picture 4 years before. So if I'd had to reshoot that today, it would be totally different. My style has definitely changed. My editing style has changed. My photography style has changed. So many different things have changed. But, at the same time, you've got to appreciate that that picture was part of the journey.
Yes. And it obviously really resonated with the publishers because they put it on the cover, and it's a different sort of thing, isn't it? It's a recipe book. You want people to look at it and think, oh, and open it and, I wonder if I could make that.
Yeah.
When they're holding that in their hands, they're almost holding, because it's a quiche, isn't it? Or a flan on the cover.
Yeah, it's a frittata, yeah.
They're almost holding that.
Yeah, there were so many aspects that went into choosing the cover. So I shot a couple of pictures with intention for them to be on the cover. And then it goes in front of a team at the publishers. So they've got a sales and marketing team that will choose the images for the cover. And I was so shocked when next thing that arrived as the cover, and that was the suggested cover. And, I was happy to go with anything. It definitely wouldn't have been my first choice. But, interesting that when put in front of a team of, say, 10 people, that's the choice and would not have been my choice. I didn't even consider it as a cover shot. So yeah, really surprised. But it is interesting to see. It makes it so subjective. It really is so subjective at the end of the day.
So how did the book come about? Did you sort of wake up one morning and think, I should do my own recipe book, and then set off to look for a publisher? Or, what was your process?
I think when I started blogging, the holy grail was to write a book. So that was my thing, was initially just to start sharing my recipes. And that, I think, is most food bloggers' holy grail, is to be able to write a book and have it published. And then working with other authors on the American publishing side. So that when I was talking about the Pink Lady competition, my first book that came through is actually an American author. And she approached me, and her publishing house is based in Boston. So I shot her first book, and then halfway through that one, she sent me a message saying, I've just submitted another book proposal to the same publishers, to Page Street Publishers, and will you shoot that one? So I had to go back saying, can we deliver the first baby first, please, before we start the pregnancy for the second baby? Because she was just on a roll, and all she wanted to do was just publish more books. And so she was like, no, I'm not giving you any time to decide. We're literally going to go straight from one book into another, which is what we did. I think we had a 3 or 4 week break and then started the second book. And then through that same publishing house, I started to work with other authors. So with that, I had insights into the publishing world. I had insights into how a manuscript looks, working with authors and recipe development, which I'd been doing already on my book, and working very closely with a lot of the authors, not all of them, but with most of them, on choosing recipes. Maybe the recipes didn't work, going back to the author saying, let's have a look let's talk about this recipe. It didn't seem to work from my side. Ingredients, changes, that sort of thing. So I really did get involved in working on the publishing side, and then working with the creative directors on the actual whole look and feel of the book at the same time. So I think when I submitted, I always knew that I wanted my own book, and I knew that I wanted a British publisher because I wanted it obviously to be locally based. And so I started looking around, and I sent through some book proposals to different publishers. And and then Little Brown, my authors, came back to me and said, yeah, we'd like to chat more. They didn't bite at my initial proposal. They weren't excited about the initial proposal, but they were happy with the photography style and the style of recipes. So it was more a case of we had to sit down and decide what we felt would be a marketable book. There's so many cookery books out there, so we had to try and come up with a concept that was original and different, and would make people stop and pick it up in a bookstore. So that was a process.
Did you find it easier shooting for your own book than shooting for somebody else's?
So much easier. I was surprised at how easy it was, because I'd done a lot of research into writing your own books, and and a lot of people that I'd spoken to, a lot of other authors, would say how stressful it was. And mine, I didn't find so stressful because it was all my own work. Whereas when I'm working on an author's book, I really want to do the best I possibly can for that recipe, and really bring it to life for that author. But at the same time, a lot of the recipes or a lot of the dishes I might never have heard of before. So I didn't even know how they were going to look, because bearing in mind, I get a manuscript and I've got no reference images with those. I've got nothing. So a lot of the time I get a recipe that might be a foreign or an international recipe that I've never heard of or even know how to pronounce. and I've got to try and Google to see what the finished dish might look like and what colors it might be. And so yeah, there was a lot. It was a major learning curve, but also very stressful, because just to make sure that I did that author's recipe justice is a lot of pressure.
Yeah. Cookery books have changed a lot over the last few decades, because at one point maybe you'd like every other recipe or 1 in 5 would have a picture. Those are always the ones you cooked because you knew what you were aiming for. Whereas now you enjoy it with your eyes, and it's your eyes that make you want to try cooking it.
Absolutely. And now it's a picture for every recipe, and it's a visual reference of the recipe. So, when you know what it's like when you're cooking a recipe, you're going to be looking at the picture thinking, oh, how big do I cut the onions? Or, is it, when they say cut it lengthways, what are they talking about? And you try and get an idea from the image. So it is very much a visual reference for the recipe, which again brings me into another area of this belief that food photography is fake food. And I think food photographers have got a really bad rep for having fake food, which is a lot more on the commercial side, which I can understand shooting under big lights and that sort of thing is really difficult. But so they do have to bring in some fake things to make the shoots more easier. But on the recipe development side and on the recipe book side, I am always contacted to make that recipe as per the directions. So nothing changes. So I can't add anything to the image. I can't use ingredients that aren't in the recipe. There's a whole lot of rules and regulations that are very different to the commercial side and to editorial side, more so than the cookery book side. Because I'll get a shot list a lot of the time from the author as well. So say, for instance, we've got a stack of pancakes. They might say, put some blueberries on top and pour some honey over. To honor the author, I feel that it should be real fresh ingredients. That's part of their recipe.
I know if you analyse lots of types of photography, then it's a lot more work than you might initially think. But food photography always strikes me as a heck of a lot of work and a lot of research, because you've got to have great ingredients. You've got to chop them or cut them photogenically. You've got to cook them, and then the end product's got to look great. And then you've got to get your camera and make them look nice.
It is sometimes in a certain time period as well, because you do get quite a short time period or a lifespan of that particular dish. Yeah, I mean, shopping, so food photography starts in the shops. So it's finding that perfect red pepper. It's making sure that, if you have pomegranate seeds, that they're not pale. You're finding nice, red, juicy, plump pomegranate seeds, for instance. So it definitely starts in the shop and making sure that the ingredients are really good looking, fresh, bright colors that are going to stand out. Yeah, and then it goes to making sure that it doesn't get damaged on the way through to the kitchen. So I've had deliveries where shooting the books, I'd order, I don't know, fresh mint or something, and then it comes in, it's all crumpled up in a little ball. And, this is my garnish that's supposed to go on top. So it's making sure that it doesn't get damaged along the way, and then cutting it and prepping it all with the end picture in mind. So every step of the way, it's having that end image in mind as to how every little piece of that dish is going to look.
You must spend a lot of time in supermarkets sort of inspecting everything, making sure it's exactly the right standard.
I'm that person people hate, especially in the COVID days where we had to kind of form a trail and start on one side of the supermarket and work our way through. And then I was the one who was going through each and every red pepper, and people were waiting for me, sort of, come on, lady, get a move on here. Because it's like, just choose your red pepper and go for it.
Yes.
So yeah, I'm the person that people used to hate in the supermarket.
How important do you think social media has been in your career?
Very, very important. Again, meeting my blogger friend who sort of really kickstarted my career in terms of getting me my first contract. That was through Facebook, and connecting with her and collaborating with her. And then, certainly on the Instagram side, being able to get my images out there, get people to see the images, meet other photographers, meet other people who are interested in photography, and just really just having that community, and things like the SheClicks community where you can put your images back into the Facebook group and get constructive criticism. hugely. I think it's a huge part of a photographer's life in terms of the social media. And it's very difficult to get over that fear of putting your images out there. But I really think it's a step in the right direction if you can start to A, ask for constructive criticism, or B, just put it out there. Just, you've taken a great shot, be proud of it, put it out on your Instagram, and yeah, just enjoy it and just live it.
Yeah. I think, whether you're trying to find a new style or whether you're trying to perfect a technique, it's always really helpful to get that kind of, that, like you say, constructive criticism where someone says, yeah, you're definitely on the right path, or maybe you should think about doing this, that might help. It really is quite a useful process to go through, I think.
Yes, you need to be careful about where you're getting your advice from. So, for instance, like SheClicks is a very uplifting, very healthy environment to be able to do that. But there are some groups on Facebook where I don't think the criticism is constructive, and so I do think if you are sensitive to it, you've got to be careful about where you're putting it out. I think camera clubs are great ways to grow your photography because you've got a judge, a knowledgeable judge. Your images are anonymous, and a lot of the feedback. Sometimes I wouldn't agree with the feedback that I got, but most of the time I would take it and run with it because those judges have a really good technical knowledge of photography. So, yeah, I think be cautious about where you're getting your feedback, but definitely feedback makes you grow.
And I wanted to ask you about becoming a Nikon ambassador, because I think you were the first food photographer to get that accolade. How did that come about, and how significant has it been in your career?
And like I mentioned, after my first entry into the Pink Lady Food Photographer of the Year, I think the photography show got in touch with the organizers, and they needed a photographer to come and speak at one of their shows. And food photography was never really a popular subject, and I think it was quite interesting. Obviously, with the awards now taking center stage and making news headlines, really brought it to the photography world's attention, the power of food photography and the vastness of food photography. So they asked me if I would go and speak on using social media and food photography. That I think was my first topic. And started talking. So I spoke for my first year on that stage, and then Nikon got in touch with me because the whole way down the line, we always give our camera details, our camera make and models. So for the Pink Lady competition, you have to give your camera details. And I think they must have got that through the photography show. Anyway, Nikon got in touch with me out of the blue and said, we love your images. Would you mind coming to speak on our stage? So started by speaking on the Nikon stage, and then there was a big sort of interest in food photography and workshops. And Nikon at that stage had their workshops they were in London. Where were they? They were in the Oxford Circus. They had their school, Nikon school, the building. And so we ran a couple of workshops from there, and they really turned out to be quite popular, and there was a sudden amazing interest in food photography, which was just actually quite amazing to be part of. It was a wave that was just taking off, and I think it was just really in the right place at the right time as well.
You put yourself in the right place at the right time.
I did. I mean, it takes courage to enter a food photography competition when you don't consider yourself a photographer, but you've got to put yourself out there.
Yes, absolutely. Now, we need to change tack quite dramatically, because there was a point when it seemed like everything was going really, really well. You're speaking at the photography show, you were a Nikon ambassador, you were a Rotolight ambassador, your book was coming out, and then you got a really scary thing happen with your health. And obviously that's made you have to reconsider everything and re-examine your priorities. I know you're very keen to discuss that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm very happy and open to discuss it. I think it's one of those things you can have the biggest goals in life, and sometimes there's a different plan for you. So I mean, I was literally at the top of that wave, and I was loving it. Everything was working out perfectly, and then I was sidelined with a breast cancer diagnosis, and particularly with the book, I had to put writing the book on hold for a couple of months while I went through treatment. Surgery and then treatment. And my publishers were incredible. I was really, I at that time, funny enough, I was more worried about whether everybody else was okay than about myself. So I was more concerned about the publishers. I was more concerned about workshops that I had booked and talks that I had booked. So I kind of just put my head down, quickly went through treatment, didn't really give it much thought, just treated it as a job almost. So it was I continued with my photography. And yeah, everything just went back to normal after treatment. Really simple, I thought at the time, and carried on writing my book. I'd had a year's extension due to the breast cancer, and started traveling with Nikon, doing some things with Nikon, and then only to have a second diagnosis of secondary breast cancer. So that means that the cancer had traveled from the primary into other parts of my body. So that makes it incurable, and it made it so we were dealing with a totally different beast at that stage. So yeah, so everything kind of just ground to a standstill, and I had to really, again, as I said earlier, I had to pivot and try and change and focus more on my health than on my actual photography. Initially, I wasn't keen to give up the photography. I thought that I would be able to manage both. But at the same time, I knew that I really had to give myself time to process the news and to work out where I was going to go from there. So yeah, in general, my photography has slowed down because, believe it or not, it's actually quite physical. So between all the shopping and the standing and the cooking and then moving sets around and carrying heavy backboards, I found it just gets a little bit tiring and maybe a little bit too physical at the moment for me.
And how do you manage it now? Do you sort of plan a few days photography or maybe a day in a certain time period and kind of manage your health around it?
Yeah, so I'm not doing as much client work because client work is very stressful. And so I've limited my client work. And I've just now decided to enjoy my photography instead of having the stress of having to work with clients. So a lot of the stuff that I'm doing now, I moved at a similar time. We moved to Jersey. So to all intents and purposes, it was an international move because nobody had ever heard of me in Jersey, and I would have had to have redeveloped my career in terms of being Jersey based. So it was all sort of at that same time where I decided that I didn't want the pressure of working closely with clients. I couldn't travel. The intention when we moved to Jersey was that I would be able to travel to the UK and go and work. So I wasn't in a position to travel. And I just decided we've got some smaller brands in Jersey that probably need a little bit of help in terms of their photography and in terms of helping them with branding. So I've teamed up with a couple of these smaller brands, and I don't charge. I just have fun. We just play around with very little expectations from either side. And yeah, if I'm not feeling well, then we don't shoot that day, or they just deliver products to me and I just play around. So I'm working more probably in the product photography side now than on the food side. So there's not the whole shopping and cooking and creating on that side. It's more taking a product and photographing around it. So a lot of that has now also turned more to lifestyle sort of photography. So it's not on a set. It's not using all the props and backboards and all the heavy things. So now a lot of it is just photographing and a bottle of kombucha in the sea or something like that. So it's less, what's the word? I think it's less physically taxing for me.
It sounds a little bit like you've gone through that process that your friend who's a psychologist asked you to go through a while ago. You know, basically you've broken down what you do and decided which elements you most enjoy, which you can feasibly fit around everything else that you need to do, and gone for that.
Absolutely. And I think for me, it's all about just now doing what I enjoy and not having to, so the pressure of turning it into a business, the pressure of being in a public place and having to do public events, I don't have that anymore. And I'm able to, just to take what I want out of it and run with that. And I've had to again learn new skills and new techniques because I'm not shooting in a studio with controlled light anymore, and I'm shooting bottles where I've got reflections and all these things which I was able to work around when I was doing food, or my doing sort of cookery book images. Whereas now, when you've got a product and you've got a particular brand, you've got to make sure that the label's clear and that the reflections are in a certain place. So again, whole new learning curve for me, working with particular brands and actually not necessarily in a studio environment.
Do you find that continuing with some photography, obviously not to the same intensity as it was before, do you find that actually helps give you some sort of mental release, and so you're not actually thinking about your health, you're just getting on with something else?
Absolutely. I always just say it's a form of meditation for me. So when I start to photograph, that's my happy place. That's my special place, being behind the camera and being able just to photograph. And even though I'm now, a lot of the time, I'm not photographing for anything at all but for myself. And being able to do the things that I'm not going to be getting any criticism on. I think that's also quite rewarding and freeing to be able to do that. And especially having been in such a niche area of photography, to be able to branch out and learn new things has been really actually quite exciting, because I don't have a photography background. I'm not a trained photographer. There's a whole load of different styles of photography and little different aspects of photography that I'm now exploring, which is really great. It's fun. It's like I've gone back to amateur and I'm just playing around with absolutely no intention.
That's nice. That's really nice.
Yeah, it's good. It's nice to play around.
So now it's time for 6 from SheClicks. I've got 10 questions from SheClickers, and I'd really like you to answer 6 questions, please. So if you could give me a number from 1 to 10.
Number 5.
Number 5. Oh, this is a good one. This is from Janina. Are there any foods that you really enjoy photographing, but you just can't eat?
Oh, fish. Mm-hmm. I'm not a big fish eater, so I don't enjoy the smell. I don't enjoy cooking fish, but I love photographing it because it is always so beautiful to photograph. So any seafood, fish, anything like that, not really my favorite. And so that was always the part of the books, of all the books that I ever shot, that I would leave till last, because I somehow had to psych myself up to get to that point. But then they were always the best images. And, as soon as I would have a bowl of mussels and photograph that, and I would just think, why? It's so easy so beautiful to photograph. Why do you put this off until last? I should actually start with it. Yeah, so definitely I think fish.
Okay. All right, can I have another number, please?
Number 7. We'll do the odd numbers.
Number 7. Oh, a slight flip on the first question is, what is your favourite food, either to photograph or to eat?
Oh, that's easy. Cake. I mean, cake is just, you can see, I love photographing cake. I mean, I do try and make a healthy cake. So if it's my cake, it'll be a healthier version. But if it's another author's cake, then it's whatever kind of recipe they've given me. But I love cakes. I love cupcakes. I love actually anything sweet. I mean, I do like it. I don't eat a lot of it because I just try to avoid it. But it is a sort of a guilty pleasure at the end of a shoot to have a couple of scoops of whatever I've been shooting. I try not to eat the whole lot. The family will generally eat the whole lot.
So if you were going to treat yourself, maybe it's your birthday coming up, and you're going to think, right, I'm going to make myself a cake. Which one would you go for?
Or something with lemon drizzle, lemon curd tarts. I'm a lemon girl. I love lemons.
Just so you know, I'd go for chocolate, just in case you need to know that.
Chocolate is my worst to photograph, by the way.
Oh, really?
A chocolate cake is the worst. It's so difficult. So difficult. It's really hard to get the separation between the layers.
Okay.
And then if the lighting's wrong, it can just look like a big brown blob. So, yeah, that's always I always find that takes me a lot longer than anything else.
I always like to challenge photographers. Okay, so could I have your third number, please?
Let me go for number 4. I'll break from my odd numbers.
Okay. Where do you get your inspiration for the composition of your food images?
All over the place. I constantly am looking at food images. So between food magazines, Waitrose magazines are great because if you've got a Waitrose card, you can just get it for free. And every month I have to get my Waitrose magazine. Pinterest, other Instagrammers, other photographers, colors, definitely the color of the dish, as opposed to the props, as opposed to the background. That also just adds inspiration. Seasonal, what's in season, in terms of what we're making, whatever. It could be Christmas, it could be Easter, but it could also be seasonal in terms of berries and cream for Wimbledon, that sort of thing. So yeah, definitely. And then for me, I think just fresh food, like lots and lots of fresh food is a big inspiration for me. So being in a market, walking around a food market and finding something that I've never seen before, buying it and trying to photograph it and then trying to learn how to cook whatever it is. Yeah, food, there's inspiration all around us. We are bombarded with food and with food photography and a lot of really great images. We just got to see them, because I think we kind of breeze past them, especially in the supermarkets and that, because it all just feels like it's marketing. But if you actually look at the images themselves, there's some really beautiful pictures out there.
Yes. I guess if you're, when you're out and there's something that makes your mouth water, you think, oh, I could, say if it's a lemon, I could make a lemon drizzle cake out of that. And then you're automatically thinking, what plate would I put it on? And it's about making it seem inviting, isn't it?
Yep. That's definitely the thought process that goes into it, is again, it starts from the market, and then it might be a bunch of strawberries, and then it's, okay, so what have I got that I can put them into? What have I got that I can put on top of it? And, just, and what's unique? Because for me, if you've got a bowl of strawberries, if you're paging through Instagram, for instance, and you're looking for a picture of strawberries, you're going to get a whole load of bowls of strawberries. So it's about making that bowl of strawberries totally unique and different and stand out, so that anybody looking at your images, for instance, on Instagram, will stop and go, oh, that's an interesting way of doing strawberries. I never thought of that before. So again, trying to come up with totally unique individual ways of showing something that we see every day, that we see around us. So it's making people stop and look.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Okay, can we have another number, please?
Number one.
Number one. So this question is from Liz, and it's, what is your first memory of holding a camera?
My first memory of holding a camera was, I was in high school. I don't know what you call it in the UK. In South Africa, we call it high school. And I borrowed my dad's camera, and I remember being utterly terrified that I was going to do something wrong. But I had this absolute passion for sunsets. So every picture I ever took was of a sunset. Nothing exciting ever came out of it. But I remember, just for me, the fear of breaking my dad's camera, I think was a big one for me. I don't know, it just seemed so big and so fancy, I suppose.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. You're borrowing my dad's camera and you start, gosh, I just can't drop this. Got to be so careful.
Yeah.
It's somehow easier when it's your own, but of course then you've paid for it and you're worried about that as well.
Definitely. It does make it easier when it's your own and it's not borrowed.
Okay. Your penultimate number then, please.
Oh, I think, shall we go with number 6, please?
Number 6. Oh, now this is another question from Liz. She said, I spotted a cat in one of your gallery images. Is that something that was planned or was it spontaneous?
Totally spontaneous. I have the most curious cat. Every setup that I used to have, she always used to come and try and sniff everything. And she doesn't eat a single thing off any of my sets, but she's always going to have a good sniff around. And I was setting up, I had my camera, I was actually playing around with my camera at that stage, getting all the settings right. And she just put her nose in at the right spot at the right time. And I think that was one of those images where I probably only had 2 images from the whole thing. But where I was able to actually just capture it just at the right moment. So purely spontaneous. And if I tried to put her there, we would have had cat legs everywhere and popcorn everywhere if I had actually tried to create that image. But no, she's just very curious.
Has it ever inspired you to try to get her in the shot again?
Oh, yes. And I've tried with my dog as well. Yeah, I've tried with both my cat and my dog. And yeah, no, it's when you try and force it, especially with domestic animals, it could end up very messy. And so many of my favorite images have been spontaneous like that. So it's been, once we've got the hero shot and once we know that we've got the shot for the book or whatever it is, then just have fun. Then that's when I love to play around and pour things and cut things and drizzle things. And a lot of the time, all those spontaneous pictures are actually the better ones at the end of the day.
Okay. All right, so your final number, please.
Number 2, please.
Number 2. Oh, no, you kind of touched on this a little bit earlier. I don't know that you actually do it, but what is the most unappealing treatment you've given food to make it look appealing? You don't tend to use things that aren't part of the ingredients, but I know, sometimes when you want to make something look shiny or something like that.
Yeah, if I do anything, it's still edible afterwards. So if it's meat, I'll add a bit of olive oil with a bit of browning, or Bovril or Marmite, just brush it over. Everything is still edible afterwards. So what I might do is undercook a couple of ingredients. So for instance, I'm doing a stew, then I'll undercook the vegetables. I'll keep those separate and undercook those slightly, and then stir them through. So just otherwise, everything just ends up the same color. If you've cooked a stew, you know that by the time it's finished, all your carrots and your meat all look the same color. So just so they stand out and they kind of pop in the picture. So you might get quite a hard carrot or an uncooked pea. But otherwise, yeah, just nothing else that I would really do.
Do you pop it back in the oven to cook it so it is sort of like, a thing you really want to eat?
Afterwards, no. Family just have to take it as it comes.
Fair enough. It looks great. Just eat it.
I've done enough cooking by that stage. If they want to cook it, they can recook it. But generally, it's not that undercooked. It's just slightly undercooked. It's slightly undercooked so that it's distinguishable.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for answering all those questions, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. And they were fun questions, so I appreciate everybody sending them through.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for listening to this episode of the She Clicks Women in Photography podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. As usual, you'll find links to Donna's social media channels and website in the show notes, so you can keep up to date with her. I'll be back with another episode soon, so please subscribe to the show on your favourite podcast platform and tell all your friends and followers about it. You'll also find She Clicks on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube if you search for She Clicks Net. So until next time, enjoy your photography.